Okay, now we are going to look at this form, which is the most important one to fill in, the standard review form, as they call it, and you'll find that named New Ethics Form 2023 Final 1, presumably. As it says at the top, all applicants conducting research that will generate data must complete the checklist and the main form below. And any supplementary information should be completed as separate documents, so you will probably have another form to fill in as well. And you can find all these forms on the Research Ethics web pages, as you know. Okay, so the checklist comes first, and you need to put yes or no here. I've already deleted no in this case. This is just to say, right, I've completed the main form, which is page 2 of this document. You must complete the declaration at the end of the main form and include your electronic signature. Students have to get their appointed supervisor to read the application, and when they approve it, sign the main form. If you don't do this, you won't be able to get your ethical application considered at all. And in addition, you must supply your research protocol. So when you submit all this, your research protocol goes in with it. The next section here picks out the supplementary forms that you have to include with your application. You don't have to include all of these. You may only have to include one. It's possible you don't have to include any. Depends on your project. Risk assessment is something which most people won't have to include, but if your research involves any potential risk to the researchers, remember you, the researcher, could be at risk, to the participants, to any other individuals, if it involves data loss, lone working, psychologically or physically invasive procedures, etc., you must complete a risk assessment. There may be occasions when you are collecting data on your own in public, so you need to consider that and the risk that is potentially there for that. A lot of you will be conducting research involving human participants, so you would be required to complete this form and submit it with your application. Note that if your study involves vulnerable individuals with incapacity to consent, or prisoners or NHS patients, you must submit your application directly to the University Research Ethics Committee. This is fairly unusual for us in speech and hearing sciences. If you have human participants, you need to have a participant information sheet with your application. And we've already seen where that is. And you will obviously, yes, customize that to meet your requirements. Don't just take the template as it is. Again, if you're conducting research with human participants, you need to obtain consent and submit copies of all consent forms with your application. That is, you design a consent form and put it in with your application. Again, you'll have templates on the QMU ethics website. You need to adapt those for your own purposes. There's a form here for permission to use lab equipment. If you are using lab equipment in SHS, then we assume that the research centre has approved that. So we don't normally expect you to provide evidence of permission. Some research in our division has involved collection of data from social media, Twitter, for example, or X as they call it now. So there's a form there for collecting data from that. That is collecting data from it. So maybe you're examining the language of people talking about a certain topic on X, not whether you are using social media to recruit participants. Okay. It is unlikely that your research will require security clearance, so I think we can skip that part. You almost certainly are not using human tissue, so it skips that. Travel risk assessment, no, unlikely. Any other relevant documentation, you can discuss that with your supervisor and decide whether or not you need to submit other documentation. Okay, now onto the form itself. We will assign a version number when the application comes in to the ethics committee. So ignore that part for now. Quite simple here. Fill in your name. Your designation is student, so you can delete staff. And you put in your matriculation number. Just undo that. Okay, put in the name of your supervisor and their contact details, contact email address, and any other researchers who will be working on the project. Quite a lot of you will be working on joint projects. You may be collecting data together and analysing it separately, for example. In this case, you can add in the names of any other researchers who will be working on the project, that is, fellow students, for example. Now, onto the research study itself. You need a title. Titles may change over the course of the project, but stick in a title now, and it's unlikely you'll have to change that on the ethics form later, unless there's a major change in your topic. Expected start date would be probably at the beginning of the semester or whenever you start collecting data, and the expected end date would be the submission date for your dissertation. Now, here you put in a short summary of the research using everyday language easily understood by lay reviewers and members of the public. So you don't put in jargon here, you don't put in subject-specific jargon, you keep it simple. Think about describing it to your parents or your grandparents or any member of the public. So you just put in here, what's your topic and why you're proposing to research it and how are you going to do it? Put it very simply. So it's maximum 100 words. Here you'll put in your principal research questions, the objectives or the aims for your studies. Notice these are alternatives. Again, keep it simple, keep it short and simple. Next, you're going to summarize your design and methodology. I think really it's more appropriate to say methods here. So you'll be just giving a fairly brief description of the method that you are going to be using to conduct your study. You've got up to 500 words to do this. So how do you plan to conduct your study from beginning to end? In the next section, ethical considerations, you're going to give an overview of the ethical issues raised by your research and how you will address them. Again, short, 300 words. This includes risks and benefits, how you'll ensure that consent is voluntary and informed, confidentiality, and how your data will be managed to protect confidentiality. You need to think about potential risks to participants or researchers, including things such as distress or reputational harm, and whether you have any conflicts of interest. It may be that you have some personal interest in the topic at hand because of your own personal circumstances or conditions, so bear that in mind here. And now data storage. Please provide details about your data, including what data you're planning to collect. Is it video, audio, printed data, electronic data? And will the data be anonymized? Now these numbers here should be references to footnotes, which are indeed at the bottom. So is it going to be anonymized? What's that? Footnote 2, no personal data is collected, hence participants cannot be identified from the collected data. That might occur particularly in an online questionnaire where participants are self-selecting, and you may collect no data which could possibly identify them. Pseudo-anonymized, 3, study data that is that can be indirectly linked to an individual using a key. So you may keep participants' names in a separate file alongside their allocated study number, their key. And there's a link, therefore, between the study number and the participant. So when analysing the data, you can't identify the participant, but you could go and identify them later if you need to identify them for any particular reason. What reasons could that be? Could they be? Well, it could be that you have responses to a questionnaire and then you want to pull out a few participants for a focus group afterwards, for example. Okay, and finally, personal data. Again, footnote 4, personal data is data that can be directly linked to an individual, which would involve names and addresses, etc. So think about what the anonymization status is of your data. Is it 2, 3, or 4? No, it's 2, 3, or 4 here. All research data will probably be stored in your QMU OneDrive account, shared, very importantly, with your supervisor and other members of the team. So it is, to that extent, safe because it's on the QMU cloud. It's password protected because only people with password can get onto that, and it's only shared with certain individuals. Okay, and this often causes questions. How long will your data be stored for? Who will destroy it and how? Will it be kept until the end of the study? Will it be kept for 5 years, then destroyed? Will it be kept indefinitely for secondary data analysis, and so on? You need to discuss this with your supervisor. Very often a supervisor will say, well, I would like to keep the data indefinitely, because at some stage in the future I may wish to revisit the data and use it in a publication, or do some more analysis on it even. Future students may want to use your data to compare between their study and yours. So there are good reasons to keep data indefinitely. If your supervisor says they want to keep it 5 years and then destroy it, that's fine, state that here. And then we come to the declaration. You have to declare that you have read the university's research ethics guidelines. You will abide by the Data Protection Act, and so on. Okay. Let me just undo those two things. Right. Now, finally, there's an optional part here where the question is, are you going to give consent for your application to be used for training purposes? Okay, so it may be that the Ethics Committee wants to use applications just to show what a good application looks like. And then you sign this, your electronic signature, or you just print your name and date it. Then you will have the form signed by your supervisor once they have read it and all the accompanying documentation, and they will date that as well. And then you send it to the Speech and Hearing Sciences Research Ethics Committee via email, along with all the accompanying documentation. And it will either be approved, it will be sent back to you, it may be sent back to you with amendments required, it may be rejected totally. That's unusual. Okay. Right, so that is the ethics form itself. Now we need to consider the supplementary forms, in particular the human participants form. So we'll do that in the next video.